Hi there, I'm Victoria Peat and welcome along to what is week 4 of the Spools of Thread Foundation Paper Piecing Seminar. Thank you so much for joining. It's absolutely brilliant that so many of you are coming along on the journey, and now of course there are a few more of us that are stuck indoors, so it's great to have something to occupy our time and our hands. So if you are brand new today, this is the first time that you're joining us, then where on earth have you been? You've missed out. No, you haven't missed out. All of the videos were on week 4, as I say, so the previous 3 weeks plus an extra bonus video following week 2 are all on YouTube. So have a look on YouTube. I've got a playlist with all of the videos on, so you can go back and have a look and see where we've got up to. So this week, what we're going to do is just have a quick recap of the pattern, where you can get the pattern and what we've done so far. And then this week, what we're going to cover off is making the quilt sandwich. We'll talk about quilting. We'll talk about binding. I have got a special offer to remind you of from Emma Bradford, and also I have got a competition or a giveaway for you, which is very exciting, so I'll tell you about that later, and I've got some news about a new foundation paper piecing pattern as well. So shall we have a bit of a start and have a look at where we are up to? So we have, this is the pattern that we're all working from, which is the spools of thread wall hanging. If you'd like to get a copy of the pattern, you can do so if you are a subscriber to the newsletter. You can either sign up for the newsletter and get a copy for free, or if you're already a subscriber, you can. There'll be a link to download a copy. If you don't want to subscribe to the newsletter, that's absolutely fine, because I know not everybody does. You can buy a copy on the website. So the choice is absolutely up to you. So what we've done is we've gone through the pattern and we have gone through all our fabric requirements, bits and pieces. We've talked about planning our fabrics. There's something in here that will tell you all about the fabrics that you want to choose and how you lay them out and how you'll work it out. Oh, we'll just say hi to a few people. Sue Burbage is here. Hello. Julie Anderson is here. And Joanne, thank you so much for watching. Lovely to have you here. We had a talk about all of the cutting out all your different bits and pieces in terms of the fabrics. We then had a conversation about how you actually do foundation paper piecing and understand the pattern. In the pattern, you've got the block layout and talked about the different sections and how you understand those, and then how you actually foundation paper piece all of those individual sections in order to create the spools of thread, so how we created each of these. So in this pattern, each one of these spools is an individually pieced section, like you saw in that pattern here. It's one of these sections, so you create 9 of those. So what we did is we covered off how to make those, and that's where in that second week 2 video, I just made 5 further spools. So in the main week 2, we made 2, and then that extra video, I just made 5 more so that you could see the process over and over, and you can try and keep up to date with, you know, not up to date, but to really embed it in your mind as to what you're doing with foundation paper piecing. Because it's one of those skills where once you've got it, you've got it, but all our brains work in different ways. Helping the children do maths homework is always a great example of this. Is my maths brain works completely different to my husband's maths brain. He'll argue his is right and mine is wrong, but brains work in different ways, and we visualize things in different ways. Oh, I've got a funny story actually. We bought a flat off plan once, and the housing developer gave us this plan, and it was brilliant, and I could visualize, right, the room is this big and the hall and this and that and the other. Was brilliant, and I was trying to describe to my husband how on earth how he could figure out what it was like. And he's like, yeah, I get it. And then we walked into the apartment for the very first time. He went, oh, I had no idea what it looked like this. And I was like, oh no, you spent all this money on an apartment. You didn't know what it was going to look like. But the point is that all of our brains work in different ways. So foundation paper piecing, I think once you've got it, you'll understand it, and you'll be away and you'll be creating patterns that are so much more complex than you ever thought you'd be able to do. So that's where that second video for week 2 is really useful, because you can just see the process time and time again. Just practice it. That's all you have to do, is just keep practicing it, and it will all start to make sense. Promise, absolutely promise. Right, so then in week 2, week 3, we started looking at how we create the quilt top, if you like, so the mini quilt, and how we added in all of the extra different bits and pieces, the sashing strips and the joining strips. Hi Sharon, thank you for joining. Lovely to have you here. And Isabel, oh, hi, Isabel. Hi, she says, hi from Spain. Good grief. I'm in Gibraltar, and it's okay here-ish, but we're of course bordering with Spain, and those poor people in Spain, you are absolutely 100% stuck at the moment with this coronavirus. And we have friends, and my husband has colleagues, and just stuck indoors. There's no walking out and about for a bit of exercise. If you've got a dog, you can walk your dog, and you can travel one person at a time in a car to the supermarkets. But oh my word, just stuck indoors. So thanks for joining me. I hope it's useful for you just to fill an hour or something, just so that you're not totally going climbing walls, because I think you might be in for the long haul. So thank you. Thanks for joining us. Right, so that's where we got to last week, and some of you have been sharing pictures of where you've got up to. Some of you are behind, but don't panic. There's no rush, it's all right. You've got some time. And then this week, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the making the quilt sandwich. What I've done is I've actually got, oh, Carol's with us as well. Hi, Carol, she says, hi. Victoria, usually out of town on a Thursday, but family self-isolating, so not seeing him today. Yeah, that's really tricky because it's not always just you that's impacted by these things. It's other people as well, and you can't always get to see them. I'm just moving this here. So I've got my husband's iPad so that I can try and keep track of people's comments as we go along, because that's nice. Right, the quilt sandwich, what I've got here is I've taken my top and I've taken all the papers out from the reverse, and I've done a daft video where I've just taken all the papers out the back. So have a look on Instagram. I may have posted it as well on Facebook, I can't remember. But where I've just taken all the papers out the back. It's just a silly bit of fun, and I've sped up the video, so don't panic if I'm not like super fast. But there's a video of me taking those out, so have a look on Instagram. And I think I'll put it on YouTube. So however you like to use social media, then it's there. So take out all of your papers at this stage. If you've got any stubborn bits of paper that won't want to come out, you might want to use some tweezers. I'll put mine over there somewhere, like tweezers that you might get with an overlocker, or an old pair of tweezers that you've got just to pick out the last little bits. I have some pieces that were stuck in from, you know, when you use your Soline glue pen, to stick on that very first piece of paper for each section. Sometimes that sort of tears the paper a little bit and leaves a tiny bit behind. If you just dampen that down a little bit, that will be enough to release the glue, because it is a washable, soluble glue and will come away. So just dampen that a little bit with a spray or something, and then those bits of paper will come away. So I've got the my top, my quilt top, if you like. Oh, Joanne, it was good to see it made so many times over. Oh yes, that extra video. Having the video was great. It was great company too. I know, I always like to have something on in the background. I've kind of got used to the way Sewing Quarter kept me company at home. So yes, I think sometimes a little video in the background is nice. Right, so we have here, oh, Geraldine. Now, Geraldine, you were very naughty and you bought a ruler the other day. I was watching John Scott, and I saw you bought yourself another ruler. Naughty girl. You must be holding the bed up with those by now. Hi, Victoria, I'm watching. Take care. Keep these going. Keep us sane, please. Yes, I'm gonna try and aim to do videos every Thursday, which seems like a bit of a plan. Right, so for this, you've got your top, you've taken out all of your papers, given it a nice press. I gave mine a very light best press spray on the reverse, gave it an iron just to make sure it was nice and flat. Then what I've done is I've made a quilt sandwich. I had some backing fabric that I've just laid, and I've placed that right side facing down. On top of that, I've got some wadding, just some thin wadding. That's the great thing about these mini projects, is that you can use your leftovers, because I find there's always bits and pieces left that you haven't got a home for. So I've laid that down, and then on top of that, I have placed my my finished top. What I've used for basting is 505 spray, which is a temporary adhesive. I don't know what I'm going to do when I run out of this, because there are no quilting shops locally, and it's not something that they can post internationally because it is a hazardous substance. So no idea what I'm going to do when I run out of that. Who knows? Hopefully there'll be a craft shop somewhere that will have something, because my nearest quilting shop is about an hour and a half, 2 hours away, which is really annoying. So what I've done is I've given the wadding a spray. and then I've attached that to the backing fabric. I've then given the other side of the wadding a spray, and I've attached my quilt top. What I've then done is on the other side is I've just got a light warm iron and pressed over, because I find that that really adheres the adhesive, just gives it a good level of stick. If you just see how I just try and it's just enough, it kind of holds it in place. If you're not happy using basting spray, or you haven't got any, or like me, you are going to be stuck without any, I like to use curved quilting pins. Now these are like a safety pin. Gosh, that looks very dark there. There you go. Those are like a safety pin, but they are curved. They've got like a little bump in them. And what that means is that it's easier to go in and out of the fabric that you've got. I'm not totally sure how I'm going to be able to show you that simply, but I'll just stick in a couple so that you can see, because I think it's always nice to see how these things work, because you're never really sure whether you want to buy them or not. But you open it up like a normal safety pin, but because it's curved, it can go in and out of the fabric easily without actually disrupting the fabric itself. The only problem I've got is that this background fabric, the backing fabric I've used, is quite thick. It'll go in and back out without actually having to lift the fabric, your quilt sandwich, too much, and then you can just attach that in. And what you can't see from that angle at all is that those quilting pins will be able to sit on almost like on the surface of your quilt sandwich, whereas a straight quilting pin, and I didn't have any straight safety pins, which is really annoying, would actually make the quilt top bump and wouldn't sit very flat. So that makes it a lot easier to deal with. So curved safety pins, quilter's pins, they normally come in giant packs. I've got like a big old pack of them here, are really useful. So have a think about those if you're not keen to use the basting spray, or you don't have any to hand. Right, next up, one thing I wanted to mention to you was, of course, you've done a lot of foundation paper piecing. You've been sewing through paper, so your needle that you're sewing with will be blunted and blunt. So make sure that you replace your needle on your machine before you sew any other project, or before you move on to quilting this one. What I would say is that sometimes, I don't know if you're like me and you can't help yourself and you do more than one project at a time, is when I move on to another project and think, oh, I'll come back and do some more paper piecing in a bit, what I'll do is I'll take the needle out of my machine and I'll just tape it onto my machine. Or you might have like a little needle folder or something for paper piecing needles, because whilst it's too blunt to do something like quilting, I would say it is something that you could use for more paper piecing. You'll know when it just starts to make a mess and it's difficult to sew with. But don't necessarily throw it out between halfway through your foundation paper piecing project, because you might want to dip in and out. So just stick it onto one side. But yes, once you're finished, make sure that you've got a brand new needle in your machine, because when you come to quilt or do anything else, it's likely to snag and cause problems with your fabrics, and you really don't want that. So what I'm going to do is, it's going to take quite a bit of time to do an awful lot of quilting. So I just thought I would just sew a couple of lines, just so that you could see what I would do, just for fun. Now, what I did do is, on this one here, I've kept the quilting pretty simple, and I can't quite show you the back. It's not very clear to see. But all I've done is I've done a horizontal line on these horizontal sashing strips. I've done another one equidistant, so I think these worked out at 1 inch each. Let me measure those. Yeah, they're approximately 1 inch finished. So I've gone 1/2 inch from each of those. So therefore I've then gone 1/2 inch from the top of the spool, and then I've gone 1/2 inch from the top, just to try and give it some level of symmetry within the project. And then going vertically, again done the same thing. I've gone halfway between on these vertical joining strips, and then I've gone 1/2 inch either side from this side of the spool and from the outside edge. And then I think that's it for the main pieces of quilting. Then what I've done is I've gone into, and shall I see if I can bring it a little bit closer for you to see? This may not work. So what I've done is I've just done some free motion on each of the spools. Some are better than others, but there's no quilt police. That's true, isn't it? So that's what I've done on each of those. It's entirely up to you. You might just want to do some stippling or just like a crosshatch, whatever you like, but just use the opportunity to practice your free motion skills because it's tricky, I think, to do foundation, not foundation, I'm saying too many different things. Free motion quilting can be quite tricky, and especially when you're doing a really big project, it can be really, really daunting. So I think by making smaller projects, it gives you a fantastic opportunity not only to practice those new skills, but to give something a try that you wouldn't ordinarily do, or you have tried and you're not very confident with. Try it on a smaller project. So something like this is absolutely super thing to do. Right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to wing it, and I'm not going to mark up the quilt. I'm just only going to do a couple of stitching lines. What I'm going to do is I've got my walking foot on my machine, which I like to use when I'm doing quilting, straight line quilting, but I'm going to increase my stitch length. It's currently on 2.4. I'm going to increase it to probably a 3 and a bit, just for quickness sake. If you have got an extension table, they are absolutely fab to add on because it just means that it reduces the amount of drag of your quilt coming off the side or off the back, particularly when you're dealing with a much bigger project. To have that support is really useful. So I'm just going to start, and I'm eyeballing here. I'm aiming to go down the middle of this little strip in the middle. So I'm kind of eyeballing where my walking foot is going to hit. I'm going to start sewing just on the wadding, and the wadding section is a little bit larger. I always start with my needle in the down position. I've increased to 3.2. We'll see what that looks like. And then I'm just going to stitch from one side all the way down to the other. I am vaguely, let's say vaguely, in the middle. And the joy of using a basting spray, of course, is that you don't have to take your pins as you go, take out your pins as you go along. And of course, me talking about clearing space, I've got loads of stuff in the way. So the quilt's not going through nicely. Excuse my nails, they're really grotty. I meant to do it last night, but there's so much going on at the moment. I didn't quite get to that. Now I'm going to go back the other way. I've just turned it round. I could have gone over. Yeah, let's just go over. That's fine. I don't need to turn it round. Pop that down. Now, in terms of quilting, a small quilt and a wall hanging is not really so much of a problem as to how often you quilt or how far apart your quilting lines are. If you are making a quilt that is going to be used or washed frequently or at all, make sure that you follow the manufacturer's instructions with regards to how far apart your quilting lines need to be. Some will say 8 inches, 4 inches, 6 inches. They will all specify how far apart you need to place your quilting lines. And that just means that that the wadding itself inside, when it's washed, won't deteriorate and pull away. It just gives it a little bit of extra stability. So have a look. But like I say, for a small project like this, it doesn't really matter because I'm never going to wash this. Although Jennifer has made hers into a lovely little, like a table mat. So if she has a spillage, she might need to wash hers, but maybe I'd hand wash. One more. Vicky has tuned in. Hi Victoria, I like the curly coat hanger. Did you make that too? Oh, no such luck. No, I bought that in a little gifty shop in Australia many years ago, near where my parents live in Port Macquarie, which is in New South Wales, between Sydney and Brisbane. A lovely, lovely place. Very nice. And there was a cute little gifty shop and I got a pack of 2 and I love it. That's the little one. I've got a big one as well. It's very nice. Now what I'm doing is you can just see here sometimes I'm stopping when I'm getting to one of these junctions. Even though the walking foot is great, sometimes you get like a little roll of fabric just where it starts to gather. So sometimes I'll just lift the presser foot and just make sure that I'm not going to get a pleat, because what I don't want is for a pleat to join when I cross over that vertical line of stitching. So just watch what you're doing as you're going along. I'm not stitching very straight. So what I've got there is, let me change the screen for you, is I have got my horizontal and vertical lines going across the middle, if you like. Then what I'd like to do, I'm not doing a very good job at this, sorry ladies, is I'd like to do a line of stitching 1/2 inch in from the outside edge. I'm going to just take my hero marker, which is somewhere I've lost, haven't lost, I've misplaced, I've put down. I'll be back in a minute, hold on, here it is. Right, I've got 2 things for you. One, oh no I don't, I thought I had it. Right, I've got my hero marker, which is what I ordinarily use, but in case of emergency, I sometimes use the back of a plastic picnic knife, but I don't have it here at the moment. I must have repurposed it for something else. But hero markers are absolutely super. This is what the packaging looks like. That's kind of what you're looking for, Clover hero marker. And it's a plastic tool that has got like a handle at one end, but at this end it gets thinner, and it's great for marking up quilt tops when you're doing straight lines. Absolutely super. I use that most frequently. I use the knife, the back of, it's not the front of, the back of a picnic knife, plastic knife. I also have, and I can't remember who this one was by. It's jolly old. I've had it for years, and I've used it with bag making. It's got all glue on the end. For leather bag making, you use a specific glue for bag making, which is a contact adhesive. So when you're doing leather bag making, and you quite often use your bone folder or the end of something like this to smooth it out. And I've got glue all over the end of it, so a bit of a mucky pup. And I need some, can't remember what the solvent's called, but there's a specific solvent to get rid of it, to get rid of that. So that's why there's a little bit grotty. But that's also, you can use a point turner to do your marking if you prefer. So I'm going to just take a quilting ruler that has gridded lines marked on, all the gridded lines marked on it, just to try and mark a straight line, and use a hero marker to mark a line. And I tend to use it backwards and forwards. Again, it can try to kind of create a little bit of a pleat if you're not careful. I just want to make sure that the line that I'm sewing does hit that point kind of down 1/2 inch from these outside edges here of those spools. But you can see I've rushed with the sewing and I've actually distorted that a little bit, which is annoying because I think I would have unpicked that and just pulled that back that way. It's annoying, but there you go. You understand what I'm trying to say and do. Oh, let's change the screen for you. Oh, no, that's not it. You want that one. Otherwise, that picture you'll see me sewing with my tongue sticking out. I don't really do that. Well, I try not to. My husband does it when he's working. He's working from home at the moment, which is highly amusing because you see him concentrating when he's typing. Tongue sticking out. He's been very well behaved, actually. He is well known for leaving the bathroom light on. He's doing a good job of not leaving the light on. He is allowed to stay. Otherwise it could be very short-lived, this working from home. He'll be out sitting in the car. Okay, and let's go back over, press the button again, and mark that other line. So today the weather here is absolutely stinking. Really, really miserable. I'll start this end. Yesterday we had massively high winds. I didn't change it after all that. We are there. No, it's not there. There we go. Sorry about that. Yeah, stinking weather. They've had flights cancelled and all sorts. And we live on a marina, and out the front are quite big yachts that people live on. Half of them are lived on, and half of them are just people that have got an expensive hobby. Although it's as expensive as sewing, who knows? Yes, so there's boats out the front, but there's a super yacht out the back, and oh my word, I've never seen anything just so frightening. I really thought it was going to bounce into the harbour yesterday. I didn't like that at all. Jolly loud. Our youngest Emily keeps coming in the night. Oh, it's very loud. Sharing a bed with a child and your husband is not an enjoyable experience. She just can't sleep still. Oh my word, she wriggles. Love you dearly, Emily, but oh my word. Now on my next video, they might be here. Oh, Sophie's watching. Oh, Soph. Oh, I'm going to cry now. I really miss Sophie. Sophie's one of my dear friends from England, and I really miss Sophie a lot. Oh. Right, come on, pull it together. Soph. Right. So, right, overhead, we'll just do, what I might do is, I'm just trying to think for the purposes of time. That's not going to do a lot, is it? That's picked up the wrong thing. Right, for the purposes of time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this line here, I'm going to do one more along this edge here, and then I'm going to show you how I put the binding on, so that I can show you at least one corner, because otherwise, how are we doing for time? I think we're going to spend too much time doing this, and we won't get to where we need to. I know many people don't have anywhere to be, but you know, there's a point at which I need to stop harping on. Now, probably what I would do is mark up all of these lines first, and then I don't have to go to and fro the machine and my workspace. But I figured if someone was just tuning in, they'd see the process rather than thinking, oh, well, I've missed that and I would have liked to have seen it. Then at least people can see it so they can catch up. Another thing I'm starting to do, just we'll say temporarily, is I'm starting a sit and sew session for people who are at home and they are bored, lonely. This week one is already full. I've already allocated the spaces for that one. But yes, I'm going to start doing those hopefully once a week, just so people can get together and sew. We're not going to sew anything in particular. It's just to give ourselves a little bit of company. Right, now for this, this line I'm going to mark now. You've got the edge of your quilt top on the side. You've got to bear in mind that your binding is going to be stitched on 1/4 of an inch from that raw edge. So what I want to do is have a line that is not 1/4 an inch from this edge. I want to bring it in a little bit further from that stitching line so that you can actually see it. So when you have a look at on this one, let me bring it closer to you again. On this side here, you've got the binding is sewn in here, and then it's sort of 1/4 of an inch from that. So that's what I'm going to aim for. Yes, let's go. There we go. So that line that should be 1/2 an inch from that raw edge. Take the ruler. Oh no, 1/2 an inch is too far. How far have I gone from that? 1/4. Just less than half. So let's go, or actually let's do it the other way around. Let's go 1/2 an inch from that stitching line, and then we know that that's going to be parallel, because you might want, depending on how things have gone for you, you might want to, should I bring it in a smidge? You might want to true up, you might be a little bit wonky. Alison Barton, hi Victoria, just joined you, sorry, well don't apologise. Welcome, welcome, welcome anytime. And thank goodness for the sanity of sewing and you showing us the way. Thank you, and that says something else. I'm not going to click it because it's on my husband's iPad and I know it will just go wrong. But thank you, Alison. Lovely to have you here. So nice to have so many familiar names popping up. I'm going to mark that one as well. Just using my hero marker. And we'll sew those 2 last lines. I've got my longer stitch length. You might like to try stitching by hand. It's a lovely project to do if you'd like to try a bit of hand quilting, but you don't want to do a ginormous project. this last line, and then I'll just move on to talk about binding. Super. Jennifer Durkin. Thank you. I see my one was crooked due to not measuring. Oh, have you? Oh, you've done your quilting. Right. Okay. Yes, I get you. Yeah, measuring is quite useful to do. Just to give you a bit of a guide. I mean, mine's not perfect by any means, but measuring just does give you that little helping hand. Right. So once you've done all of your quilting and you're happy, what you then need to do is just get rid of this excess wadding and this excess backing fabric. So for this, I do normally like to use a long ruler. Let's see if that will fit, because I've got a whole lot of stuff going on here with laptop and bits and pieces. So I'm not sure this will necessarily work. Nothing like dealing with a cramped working space. So what I'll do is, you've got a relatively straight line here between the edges of the spools and a stitching line here where you put on this sashing. I will try and get a line that is as straight as possible to trim, and that's in line with the edge of this this top of the mini. Sorry, I was trying to think and measure at the same time, and it obviously wasn't going well. Right, so the where I've got mine, where I think I'm happy with, is 2 inches from this outside edge. You could probably go 2 1/8 of an inch. So I'm just going to move that across a little bit. Oh, my husband's in the other room doing a conference call and he's not closed the door. So you may learn a lot about his work. And he's really loud when he talks on the phone as well. Right, so what I've got is a nice straight line. I've got the 2 1/8 of an inch on that seam line with the sashing strip next to the spools, and I'm just going to trim off this excess. And it is ideal if you can use a longer quilting ruler, because that means that you're not having to move the ruler as long as you go. Now I've got a little bit, and you probably can't see, but just a little bit on here where it's fraying, where it's frayed a little bit, but that's within the 1/4 of an inch of this outside edge. So I'm going to leave that, and I'm going to be happy with where I've trimmed. So then I'll do the other 4 sides, but I'm only going to do 2 for the time being, because I'm going to try and, what I'll do is I'll probably go back and unpick some of my binding to try and get it finished, all the quilting done. So I'm going to start with 2 1/8 of an inch on this bottom sashing piece, just to see whether the raw edges are kind of close enough to where I'm going to cut, and I'm going to cut another straight line. There we go. So that's what I would do, is I would make sure all of my 4 sides were trimmed down really nicely to give you something nice and straight to work with. So that gives it, make sure it's square and nice and true and ready to go. So all of your edges should look nice and sharp. What I'm going to do now is talk to you a little bit about binding. I figured that it might be useful to talk about binding only really quickly, because it's part of the project and I thought it'd be nice to do. I have got a separate video on binding, but it was before I started doing the lives, and it needs editing and joining in and whatnot. But I'm actually quite tempted to just film another one and do it as live, because I think you lot are quite a forgiving audience, and you won't mind if it's not totally polished and wonderful. So I think I might just wing it. Let's see. Right, so in terms of binding, in the instructions it spoke about cutting from a fat quarter. You may not, you may be cutting from a width of fabric or something. That's entirely up to you how you do that. But the instructions that I gave were for dealing with fat quarters, because I figured it was a good fat quarter friendly type project. So you need all of your different strips, and I've cheated a little bit and I've already made some of the binding, but I thought I would show you how I join my binding strips. So I'll take, and I like to work with 2 1/2 inch strips, one because I find them easier to cut than 2 1/4 inch strips, because you can cut them with your stripology ruler or your June Tailor, whatever you might have. I find them a lot easier to deal with than the 2 1/4 inch strips. So I've got 2 1/2 inch strips. but choose whatever you prefer to work with, and maybe try 2 different sizes and see what works best for you. Right, so what you need to do is take 2 of your strips, and you need to place one of them, this is the way I find it easier, one of them right sides uppermost, running horizontally in front of you. Then take your second piece and lay that right sides together, running vertically. So that's going to sit on top. And I'm afraid this is going to be kind of upside down for you guys, but I figured trying to do this the other way around might be too much for my little brain to cope with. You'll notice here I've left on the selvage. So I'm just making sure that the selvage pokes out over the top of this piece underneath. If you're dealing a piece that doesn't have a selvage on, I like to overlap my pieces, or let there be a bit of an overhang on each side. So I'll leave 1/4 of an inch hanging out on both sides. Where we're going to sew, and it's good to try and understand what you're doing, because it is very easy to sew it the wrong way. I could have done with a slightly more obvious pen. I'm just going to stick in a little pin here, just so it doesn't move whilst I'm showing you. Is you're going to sew from this point here, in this corner, down to this point here. If you like, there is a song there, if you like a lot of chocolate. If you like, what you can do is you can draw a line. Ideally, don't use a pencil, use a friction pen or a chalk pen or something. But I even had a pencil to hand when I remembered it. So this is the line that you will be sewing along. You might be comfortable to just wing it. You might be really comfortable with your machine, or you might have relevant markings on your machine to follow. But if you don't, then marking it is a great idea. So you can pin it if you like. So I'll just stick 2 because I'm trying to do too many buttons and things at the same time. So over at the machine, I'll bring this over. I'll put the needle in the down position. I do like to start in the down position, normally with the needle down through the fabric, but when I'm doing binding strips, I like to put the needle down, and then I'll bring the fabric over, and the point at which this little V is, the start of the line, I'll place the needle or the fabric right up to the needle, where the needle goes in that little gap. So I'll pop that right up to the edge, and then I'll put the presser foot down, and then just make sure that you're going nice and straight and that this isn't off at a skew-if angle anywhere, because ideally what you want is to be able to join these 2 pieces together on this angle, because that will mean, I will show you what it means in a moment. So I'll just do the first stitch by hand, and then I'll stitch across. Now, what I was saying before is you might have markings on your machine. You might have a little a line on a throat plate or on your extension table, a little line here that will show you the position of the middle drop on the needle. If not, the other thing that you can do is you could just stick a bit of washi tape on and then use a small quilting ruler to just draw that line, because to have that line is really useful, not only for this, but if you're doing half square triangles or anything like that. Oh, and I've just realised I am on a long stitch length, so I'll just reduce that back down. Ideally as well, choose a thread colour that matches your fabric, not one that contrasts wildly. But for what we're doing, that's okay. So I get to the other end. Now, if I were doing this at home on my own, normally, as I would then take the other end of this strip and I would place that right sides facing uppermost. I would then take my next strip and place that right sides together, and then I would put that through the machine. So I would sew across. But this I've got prepped already. I can't sew that to that end. That's ready to sew onto the quilt. Okay, so next up, what I've got here is this is the line of stitching that we've just done. I'm then going to take off this excess here at this corner. Trim that off 1/4 of an inch away. At the same time, I also like to take off these 2 little dog ears. So I'll just whip those off as well. Oh, wrong way. Oh, that was a disaster. And then I'm going to press that flat, and I'm going to press this open. Oh, press it flat. Listen to yourself. Good advice. Open this out. I hope you can't hear my husband. It's really dull. I hope you can't hear him whistling on in the background. Give that a press open. You really can't see that. Press that open, and then I'm going to turn it over and press from the right side. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the binding and do wrong sides together and press that closed. So I've done that already on the length that I already have. So I'll just do a little bit more to the end for you. Sorry about the cable going across, but we are short on relevant or PowerPoints in the right places. Got lights plugged in, chargers, laptops, all sorts going on. Give that a nice press. So that is your binding done. And then what I'll do is I'll add that to a spool or a big piece of card or something. It's always quite good to try and keep that neat and tidy. Okay. So that is your binding done and ready to go. In terms of sewing it to your project, I like to think about where the project's going to go and where the joins might sit. I always tend to start, if this is my, I'll turn it around this way, if this is my bottom corner, I will tend to start my binding, well, aim to have the join of my binding somewhere sort of halfway or towards the lower edge. The only thing you don't want to do is start it on a corner, because that's not going to work. What I do always recommend you do is you take your binding and just sort of walk it round your quilt, just to make sure that where you're, and just give yourself a little bit of extra ease at the corner, just to make sure that any of the joins that you've got don't sit on a corner, because when you're trying to do the corners, to have that extra join piece to deal with at the same time as trying to do a mitered corner, I find really tricky. So I always try and give myself a little bit of extra room if needs be. So what I'm going to do is, the way that I like to do my binding, and people like to do it in different ways, is that I like to machine mine to the front. I'll then wrap it over to the back, and I will either hand stitch it or I will actually stitch in the ditch from the front. So that's what I'm going to show you today, is how I do that. I'm going to start off with, I'm going to aim to have my join somewhere on this middle point here, but I'm actually going to start sewing the binding further away, because when it comes back round to this side here, when you come to join your two bits of binding, you need to give yourself a little bit of extra leeway. Now, sadly, I'm not going to get to that today because I haven't quilted everything, but I'll do that extra binding video. So what I'm going to do is just, this is my starting point, and I'm going to sew down in this direction. Just stick a pin in there just to start off with. So I've got my binding wrong sides together, and I've got that on the top of my quilt. And I'm going to stitch down here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stop 1/4 of an inch from this edge, here. So I'm going to stitch down until 1/4 of an inch. So I'm just going to turn it this way so that I can pin appropriately. So I'm going to take my my little quilting ruler, which is always really useful, and I place that on the edge on the 1/4 of an inch. I'm going to take my glass-headed pin, because they are nice and easy to see and they're nice and sturdy, and I'm going to stick that in 1/4 of an inch from the edge, and I'm going to have it sticking out from the edge of the quilt here, just as a visual guide. I'm going to take this over to the machine, and I'm going to stitch with a standard stitch length 1/4 of an inch from the outside edge. Pop my needle in. I'm going to take that first pin out, and I'm going to lay the binding. Oh, helps if I show you the actual sewing machine and what I'm doing. So I've taken the pin out, so I placed this underneath the machine, I put the presser foot down, I took out that pin that was in there, and then you notice I've not pinned any of this in place, which is something that you might think that you need to do if you've come from a quilting, sewing, dressmaking background, but no need. So I will just make sure that this raw edge is sitting nicely on top, and I'm going to sew until I get to that pin, 1/4 of an inch. So I'm going to stitch a couple of stitches and go back, just to secure that. And I'm going to go down until I get to where this pin is. I'm not going to sew over the pin, but I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to stop with my needle down, and I'm going to pivot. Just making sure that those raw edges match up. And I can see where the needle's going, the pin's going in. It's sticking out a nice distance so that I can see. And I'm going to go slowly but carefully so I don't sew through that pin. And I'd say that that is about 1/4 of an inch at the 1/4 of an inch mark. I'm going to take that pin out. And from here, I'm going to lift and pivot, and I'm going to sew directly to the corner of the quilt. I've left the binding in place. It's the binding still running down as if it was still in a completely straight line, but I'm coming off at an angle. No need to reverse. Oh, I've got some spare thread caught underneath there. So on here, let's see how you can see that. I've come all the way straight down 1/4 of an inch from the edge, and then I've stopped 1/4 of an inch from the lower edge, and then I've pivoted out. Then when I come to sew the next side, I take my binding and I take it, let's move all that out of the way so you can see what you're looking at. Oh, Joanne, I'm so glad. She says, can't hear any background, just you and the machine. Oh, that's good. You don't want to hear him harping on. Right, so what I've done is I've taken this and I've folded that up and away. So now what I've got is the raw edge of the next edge of the quilt top, and then the binding, and they're all in one nice straight line. And you can see here, this little fold here is creating a 45-degree angle. So that's going up. I'll then take the binding back over that fold, keeping this nice and flat underneath, and you're creating a little fold underneath. Some frayage going on. And then I'm going to take a pin just to hold it in place whilst I'm talking to you. So what I've got is I've folded up, I've got that 45-degree line, and then I folded back over on itself. So this is what I've created here. There's like a little extra fold. That's the little line that I stitched a minute ago. That's very dark, the light here today, but you can see okay. So I folded up and back. So the fold is now running along that edge. So that's the fold we created. And then this line here is going to be stitched 1/4 of an inch from that raw edge. And I'm going to sew all the way from that raw, the folded edge through all of the layers. Take the pin out. You don't need to put that pin in or sewing clip or whatever you've used, but I've just done that so that I don't lose where I'm up to whilst chatting. So you do exactly the same at this other edge, but I've not trimmed that, so I'm just going to sew a decent distance so that you can see. Okay, so let's stop there. Okay, so what we've got now is that you imagine that this is sewn all the way around. And what I'll do is I'll do that separate video. Christine, hi, did you say 2 1/4 or 2 1/2 of the binding? Personally, I prefer to do the 2 1/2 inch strips. The 2 1/2 strips I find, hold on, where are you? I prefer to do the 2 1/2 inch strips because I find them easier to cut with something like a Creative Grids or a June Taylor than doing 1/4 of an inch, but it's entirely up to you. I suggest try a little, not too little, because little projects can be quite tricky, but try either a smaller project with 2 1/2 and with 2 1/4, and just see what you're happiest with and see what works better for you. And it depends, I think, whether you're machine stitching or whether you're hand stitching and how tight you like it. It's entirely up to you, but give both a try. But for this project, I've said 2 1/2 inch, so it's up to you. Right, so when I've got to this point, what I like to do is I will press this away, and I will take this to my my pressing surface, and I will just press that away. So pleased I chose this burgundy colour, it's really lovely. So all the way around the outside edges, I will give that a press. Oh, knock my iron over. Because I think that makes this look nice and neat, and just I don't know, just finishes it just slightly more professionally, if you like. And then what I'll do is I will take this and I will flip it over to the other side. Now, from this point, you can flip it over, and this fabric's terrible, it's fraying everywhere. What you can do is, at this point, you might want to hand stitch, or I'll show you how I machine stitch. You may also want to do this the other way around. You may want to machine onto the back and bring over to the front and hand stitch. Again, it's one of those things that you've just got to be happy with as to what's easiest for you. The method I'm going to show you today is stitching in the ditch. And the way I like to do that is that you take your binding, bring it over to the reverse, and from the front, I will take a pin and stick a pin where the ditch is, so the space between the binding and the background fabric. I'll stick a pin through and out along that line with the aim of catching the binding on the back side. Let's see if we can do it on this camera and see a little bit more clearly. Oh, perhaps if I was standing on the excess binding. So on the front, the pin is going in on the ditch, and on the back it's just catching sort of 1/8 of an inch from that edge, because my aim is to be able to sew in the ditch all the way around. So I'll stick a pin in here, and then I'll go over to this edge. I'm going to leave this corner for a little minute, and I'm feeling with my fingers on my left hand on the underside where that pin's coming through, and you can feel on the top where that seam is between the binding and the background fabric, and I'm just poking through along the ditch, and you can feel that the pin's in the right place. And I'll just do the next one along as well, and all the time I'm just making sure that the binding on the front is looking quite even, and I'm not pulling too tight in any one particular spot. And on the back, you can then see that your pins, this is where the glass-headed quilter's pins are really useful because they're nice and long. The other ones I quite like to use are the clover flower head pins, because they're also nice and long and thin, either or. So I'll make sure that's nice and even. We've then got this corner to deal with. And the way that I'll deal with the corner is that I'll have it sitting like this against where I'm sitting, and then I'll fold it over. I'll keep this this way up, and I'll just bend the corner back towards me, and I'll bring this side nice and straight, so making sure that this is running nice and straight, and I'll just poke that in and underneath, so keeping that line straight as far as you can towards this raw edge in a straight line. And then on the top, it almost creates like a little triangle here that I will then fold over and on the top. And you can see here, I've not done a very good job of folding that corner because it looks all skew-if. So it's just about rejigging that fabric until you can create a pleat that works. And I'm not, I'm doing a really terrible job. There we go. So just jig that about a bit until you've got a nice mitre corner. And then from the wrong side, I'm going to stick a pin through that little edge. So let me bring that up for you. So I've got, this is the first edge that I folded in, and then this is the second one. So I've just stuck that pin in that side on the underside. And I'm just going to stick a pin on this side. And I realise I've just stuck that the wrong way around because I can't get it out. So I've stuck the pin in that way round so that I know that I'll be able to take that out when I come to this side. So when I've pinned all the way around, and I will do the whole of the quilt all the way around, you might run out of pins. So you might do as far as you can and then sew the rest. But I like to, if I can, is to pin all the way around so I don't need to stop. Some people don't pin at all and they'll just come and do their mitre corners and show off and be ever such clever clogs. But for me, I'm not quite so confident because I want to just make sure that the binding, when going on by machine, that I've got this bit in exactly the right place and it's not overhanging too much. And I want to be able to stitch in the ditch. Now, stitching in the ditch, I will frequently use something like let's see, where is it? My blind hem foot. So on this machine, which is a foot G, this comes with, you can get a stitch in the ditch foot, but if you don't have that, something like a blind hem foot is really good because it's got this little rudder. Let me show you on here. Can you see the little rudder? Sorry, there's me squinting at the screen to see if you can see what I can see. But it's got a rudder in the middle that will help you guide the fabric when you're sewing. I'm going to just wing it with my walking foot, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch as close as I can to the ditch that is between the binding and the background fabric. And ideally, if you could get thread that in the top that matches your background fabric, and in the bobbin, I've gone to the wrong screen, sorry. In the bobbin, you can have a thread that matches the binding that you're using. So I'm going to start again. I've got my presser foot up, and if you've got a double height lift on your presser foot, that's really handy, just to make sure that you start off with your needle in exactly the right position. And I'll pop that down and I'm going to stitch in the ditch, and all the time feeling underneath. You can feel that wrap of that binding underneath, so don't sew over your pins. And this is very unforgiving if you're using a white thread on a burgundy binding. Not very clever. Oh, and Harriet's watching. Oh, Harriet, I miss you as well. Oh, is it the same, Harriet? I'm just having a look at the little icon with my squinty eyes. Oh, it is Harriet. Oh, I love you, Harriet. I miss you dearly. Miss you dearly. So I'm sewing along until I get near that corner point. And then what I'm hoping for is that the weight of the presser foot is enough to try and keep this little mitre in place. So I'm not going to sew over the pin. I'm going to get as close to the pin as I can. Again, these nice long pins, you can see where it's sticking out. And then when I get close enough to it, I'll take that pin out and I'll stitch until I get to the corner. If you're not sure how far that next stitch is going to take you, you can hand crank, lift and turn. Make sure it's all the way down. And then continue. All the way along. Ideally in that ditch. And you can see I've got my walking foot on. I wouldn't necessarily do it with my walking foot, so that's not great. I've gone a little bit wonky wonk. And I'll stop there. So what you're doing here is that you're stitching in the ditch, so you're coming along and down, so that hides the stitching, and then on the back, this is where it would be really great if your bobbin thread was the same colour as your what's this called, binding. So that should be a relatively even 1/8 of an inch from that outside edge. So that's the aim for what you're doing with your binding. So that would go all the way around. I've just done a little bit off-piste on this piece here, but we'll look past that for today. So that's how you would sew on your binding. Now, one thing I forgot to mention is have a think about how you're going to hang your mini quilt. You might have a cute little quilt hanger. They make those. Have a look at if you're going to the Festival of Quilts or something. They make really cute little hangers and bits and pieces. Or you might want some little corners or something. Add those in before you add your binding. Or you might want to add a sleeve, and you can of course hand stitch that in place afterwards, or you can incorporate it at the same time as you do your binding. It's up to you how you want to do that. But then that's it. That's done, dusted, all finished. And that's exciting. It's brilliant. So I hope that's been really useful. I've got a couple of other bits and pieces to tell you about today before you go anywhere. I have got, I will just show you. I've got this new pattern that I designed actually for Sewing Quarter many, many moons ago. But I'm now releasing it as a PDF pattern. No paper patterns for the time being because there are postal problems anticipated, so I'm going to avoid trying to do things in paper for the time being. So there's a PDF download of the cactus in a pot. I've used it there for a cushion, but you could incorporate it into a bag or anything like that. Lots of different options. I wanted to remind you of the discount with Emma Bradford. So you can get 20% off anything that you buy for until the end of March. We've written the 30th of March, but there are 31 days, so we'll need to check with her on that. But that still gives you a fairly decent amount of time to get hold of that discount. But the exciting thing is I have got a giveaway for you, and I hope that you're still tuning in to hear about the giveaway because it's absolutely super. What I've done is I've decided to give away £20 to spend at the Swift Quilting Company. And this is a little competition to encourage you to finish off your makes. So if you have been making, or you have made, or you're thinking about making, do join in. It would be absolutely super to see all of your finished makes because I'm really proud of you all taking part and learning foundation paper piecing. So finish it off, get it done, post a picture on the Facebook page or send it to me in Messenger or whatever it is, and I'm going to add them all to a gallery of makes that I've got on the website, which is just where I will load up everybody's finished makes. And it's a really great place to go for people to go for inspiration and just guidance and, oh, wow, look how they've done theirs. It's a great place to show off. So I think that's a really lovely thing to do. So we shall, I'll do that. If you can get those into me by the end of March, I will put them all into the album, and early April I'll randomly select one and you'll get £20 to spend at the Swift Quilting Company. You'll need to spend it all in one go because of Emma's systems can't quite cope with anything else. You have to spend it all in one go, but for me, not so much of a hardship. I think I could spend £20 easily in a fabric shop. So you can spend that online, or if you're local, you can go into her store. But that would be really, really lovely if you wanted to send me a picture of your make. That would be super. Right, have I got anything else to mention? I don't think I do. Other than, thank you so much. I have really, really enjoyed doing this. I was hesitant to do it in the first place, but I'm so glad that I've done it, and so many of you have taken part. It's really warms the cockles, and I'm super, super pleased. If you've got any questions, you know where I am. I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you might have. But if that's it, I don't think there's any more questions. Thank you so much, and I will see you again soon. Bye.